Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the difference between a resilient community and a fragile community and what that has to do with election violence prevention. This is actually a really important idea, so today's video is going to be just a little bit longer than some of them are. Let's start by talking about a fragile community. In this context, we can define a fragile community as one that is composed of subgroups that don't have a lot of connections. What's a subgroup? Basically, a subgroup is a group of people who live in the same community and tend to spend a lot of time together. So a subgroup might be the people who go to the same church. It might be people on the same basketball team. It might be the local Girl Scouts. It might be people who work at the Five and Dime. We don't have Five and Dimes anymore. You know what I mean, like Dollar General. Anyway, so groups of people that tend to spend a lot of time together. And usually these groups of people are demographically fairly similar to each other. And a lot of times they think similarly to each other. So imagine like your friend group or the people that you have joined clubs with or whatever it is that you do. Now, in a fragile community, you have a bunch of these subgroups, and the people in the subgroups just don't know each other very well at all. So they go about their day to day, they live in the same town, but subgroup A and subgroup B and subgroup C never cross paths because they go to different stores and they eat at different restaurants and they do different activities. A community like this one has a lot of trouble disrupting a destructive pattern. So let's talk about fear and anger and othering, for example. This is a huge thing. We know that in election violence prevention, one of the problems is that there's this social condition where people are starting to feel afraid of each other and angry with each other, and it's all their fault, and I'm going to blame this other group of people. And in a situation where the subgroups of a community don't know each other, it's very easy for that to happen. Subgroup A can feel really angry with subgroup B because they don't actually know subgroup B. All they know about them is what they are told about them by politicians and news cycles and memes on social media. Also, a fragile community where those subgroups are really separated can't stop rumors because, again, we don't know each other. And so, if you're telling me a rumor about another group of people, if you're telling me that they're going to start violence or that they've been lying about something or whatever, I don't know that I shouldn't believe you because I don't know anybody in that group. I can make a lot of assumptions about that other group. And I can also really easily develop in my head like a right, wrong, good, evil kind of dynamic. I don't want to talk about, oh, it's complicated. I think subgroup B might actually have a really good point. Because I don't know them and they don't know me. And as far as I know, there's no reason why we shouldn't be enemies. And when something happens in a community like this, even if I am not a naturally violent person, and the folks in the other subgroups are not naturally violent people, but if something goes wrong and there's some kind of spark of violence, it is very easy for that violence to ripple and escalate because we're already afraid of each other. We're already blaming each other. We already make assumptions about each other, and we already identify as groups of good and evil people. Let's look at instead a resilient community. So how can we do this differently? First off, a resilient community still has subgroups. It's not like everybody has to be friends with everybody else and you've got to know the names of everybody and their dog in the entire town. But you have more relational connections between the subgroups. So subgroup A and subgroup B are still subgroups and they're still not hanging out with each other, but there are people, at least one person, maybe two in subgroup A who know one person, maybe two in subgroup B, and they have regular communications back and forth. Having subgroups at all is a normal thing because we naturally drift toward people who are kind of like us. That feels really comfortable. We provide mutual support. But if we've reached out and we also have relationships with other subgroups and we have regular solid communication going back and forth, then we're ready to disrupt violence. If I know somebody in another subgroup, then I'm going to have more empathy for what's going on in that subgroup. I'm also going to have the ability to tell the truth about what's happening in other groups. So I'll disrupt rumors naturally. If I hear that something scary is going on in this other group and I know somebody from that other group, I can just say, hey, I've been hearing this wacky rumor. Is this true? I also am going to know something about the nature of people. Like if somebody's on TV telling me I should be terrified of this other group of people because they're, wanting violence in the country or they want to ruin my life or whatever the rumor is, if I know them personally, or at least a few of them, I'm not going to believe that rumor. I'm not going to let you make me scared of them. I know them. They're not actually like that. Also, in a resilient community where these relationships exist between the subgroups, there's a piece about understanding more than one story. I know how my group of people looks at things and I know what the perspective is, but I also know that there are other stories and other ways of looking at the world. I don't necessarily believe in those other ways of looking at the world, but I understand what they are. And I'm not just saying that they're dismissible or ridiculous or making fun of them or having contempt for them, but I'm saying, I kind of get it. Like, I disagree with it, but I get it. In a community like this one, when something happens, violence is a lot less likely to ripple or escalate. I'm not going to believe the scary rumors about the other subgroups because I've known these people and I know that this isn't true. So my community is more resilient. What do I do with this idea of resilient and fragile communities? Well, the action step here is I go out and I get to know somebody that I don't already know, and I make sure that it's somebody who isn't very much like me. If I form a couple of these relationships in other subgroups and other people do the same thing, then suddenly our community is a lot more resilient against possible violence. And if you're sitting there going, how do I even begin to do that? That will be the subject of a bunch more videos in the future. Next time we talk, we're going to talk about a term called shocks, finding out what a shock is and why it matters in the context of election violence prevention.